Everyone in India, and a good morning to the US audience. And we have got Robert Spencer today, along with Shri Vibhuti Jha. This is our Wednesday show, working this time on Thursday because we were not able to host it for some reason. And welcome, Robert. How are you doing?
Very good.
Uh,
Thank you. Good to see you both.
Thank you.
welcome, Vibhuti ji. How are you doing? So,
Namaste. Namaste.
let me
Greetings.
start straight away. My question goes to Robert. And of course, we both will be in the question mode today because Robert is the only one fielding the questions. So you're coming out with a new book. It's called The Critical Quran.
Yes, I happen to have one right here.
Eh,
The Critical Quran is available for pre-order now at Amazon. It is listed at Amazon India. I do not think it is available for pre-order there. I'm not sure. It wasn't the last time I looked a few days ago, but it will be available May 3rd, and it should be available in India soon after that. It's always difficult for various reasons, and many people have told me they would like to see Hindi editions. I would love to see that, but if you know translators and publishers who are interested, please let me know. In the meantime, the Critical Quran is, in the first place, a clear and honest translation of the Quran. Many
right.
translations of the Quran into English are, I believe, deliberately intended to obfuscate, to obscure what the Quran says rather than to illuminate it, particularly on the passages that are most problematic for non-Muslims. And so the Critical Quran makes them exactly clear. For example, one of the things that almost all the English translations do, actually all of them that I know of, is translate jihad as struggle or strive. And so when the Quran says to jihada, to wage jihad in the name of Allah, most of the English translations say strive hard in the way of Allah. So the English speaking non-Muslim thinks strive hard in the way of Allah. That means be more religious, pray, be nice to people, and so on. And they don't realize that this in Islamic theology refers specifically to warfare against non-Muslims. And so this Quran says wage jihad in the name of Allah. So people will understand that that's what the Arabic says. And that this is what is understood by it is made clear by the commentary which comes from the mainstream Islamic commentators on the Quran, explaining how these passages are understood by ordinary Muslims when they try to study the Quran, because these are the same commentators they go to. Also, it has variant readings in it. Islamic apologists claim that every copy of the Quran is exactly the same as every other copy. I don't know if you've heard this, but this is a very common.
Yes, we have.
Yeah, you know, and it's supposed to be a sign of the miraculous protection of the text by Allah, and a sign that the Quran is really from Allah, and that there is an Allah for it to come from. But in reality, there are many variations in the text. Most of them are very minor, but even the slightest variation contradicts what these apologists say. And so in this Quran, for the first time, I'm listing the variations and showing how there are divergences within the text, and it's not like what we have been told.
And what about the chronology? Because one of the most problematic things about the Quran is that it's not in a chronological order.
Yes,
And you have to read it along with their exegesis. That
yes,
is, that unless you have a knowledge of the hadith and the sirah, you just can't understand what is written. It's actually completely unintelligible if you're reading the Quran without having any idea of the history of the Arabia of that time and the traditions, that is the hadith.
yes, you're quite right. And this is something that most people don't realize, because anytime a non-Muslim quotes the Quran in a manner that's inconvenient for Muslims, then an Islamic apologist will say, you're quoting it out of context. And yet, when you read the Quran, one of the things that becomes immediately obvious is that there's no context, that these things are said without any explanation of the circumstances in which they are being said. And for the most part, you have no idea what's going on unless, as you say, you go to the commentaries and study the history. So the critical Quran has all that in there. And you
Okay.
can understand the chronology, the context, the history, everything. It's in the notes right there on the page. And so it's an aid to understanding the Quran as you read.
Yeah, so for instance, I'll just take one example, which is the most common apology that is offered. Two very common apologies are offered. And one is your religion for you and my religion for me. That is the Surah 107, that
109.
what is called the Al Kafirun. And the other one is that Surah Al Baqarah 256, that it says that there is no compulsion in religion. So uh, these are the commonest apologies. Being the commonest apologies, I guess you must have dealt with these in detail in your critical Quran. How have
Yeah,
you dealt with these?
absolutely. Well, let's go to, I have it here, and we'll go to chapter 2, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 256. And I note in the footnote it says, Islamic spokesmen in the West frequently quote this verse to disprove the contention that Islam spread by the sword. Actually, I shouldn't have said in the West. I'll try to change that in the next edition because they say
Yes,
that.
they say that everywhere.
Yes, exactly. And so, in the first place, I note that according to an early Muslim, Mujahid ibn Jabr, this verse was abrogated by chapter 9, verse 29, in which the Muslims are commanded to fight against the people of the book. And then I go on to explain other understandings of it and the imperative to fight that is considered to be paramount in the Quran, which is chapter 2, verse 193, and also echoed in chapter 8, verse 39, that Muslims must fight until religion is all for Allah. And so, how can there be no compulsion in religion if you're going to keep fighting until religion is all for Allah? If religion is all for Allah, then you're going to have to force some people to make their religion for Allah, and that means there is compulsion in religion. And actually in practice we see this because there is compulsion in religion. Obviously forced conversion is something that many Muslims engage in on a regular basis, and they justify this by claiming that it's not forced. And so, for example, years ago there were two Fox News reporters, actually a reporter and a photographer, Steve Centani and Olaf Wiig, who were captured by jihadis, and they converted to Islam. And there was a video made in which they were saying, with the gun pointed to their heads, they're saying, "We were not forced to do this." It's true. The people who made the video probably didn't realize the comic irony of what they were saying. They probably thought, well, of course they have a choice. They could have chosen to die, but instead they chose to convert to Islam. And so they had a choice. There was no compulsion.
Okay, so before we proceed further, let me ask all the viewers, please uh, send your questions, keep sending your questions while we are talking for Robert, so that at the end of our discussion, he can take your questions. And also, new viewers, please subscribe. And all those watching, please like the video. Now, while we are on 256, I just supporting you in the sense that they say that you're quoting it out of context. They tell us when we quote it. But you read 254. 254 says that every unbeliever is an oppressor. Then you go to 255, that is the Ayat al Kursi, which says that none except Allah has the right to be worshipped. And then in 256, I have Pictol's translation before me. And I just read from Pictol's translation in English. So there's no compulsion in religion. Now, what follows within this ayat? The right direction is henceforth distinct from error, and he who rejecteth false deities and believeth in Allah had grasped a firm handhold which will never break. In fact, the Arabic term that is used is taghut, and
Yeah.
taghut means the worst criminal, bigger than a kafir. So I don't know what is out of context. In fact, that particular sentence, that is, there's no compulsion in religion, that stands out as completely out of context.
Yes, that's right. It doesn't go with the rest of it. And that's something that I point out all through the Quran, that if the reader is attentive, then there are numerous passages that don't fit with the flow of what is being said. And it's very clear all through the book that there are interpolations and edits and all manner of changes, such that the final product is in many areas completely incoherent. Also, I can note you pointed out taghut, and taghut is not even an Arabic word. It's an Ethiopic word. And
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh,
that's right. It according to the Tafsir al-Jalalain, it means shaitan or idols, and can be singular or plural. But that's actually an exegesis that's based on conjecture, because being an Ethiopic import from Arabic, the Muslims don't actually know what it means. And many, many words in the Quran are not Arabic and are assigned meanings by the commentators, like the two Jalals, the Tafsir al-Jalalain, and those meanings are not based on the meaning of the word or the pre-Quranic usage of the word. They're only just based on the consensus of the Islamic scholars. And so this is also something that I bring out in the Critical Quran, that it's supposed to be a book in pure Arabic, and it's not in pure Arabic. And it's supposed to be a book that is clear, and it's anything but clear in many passages.
Yeah, quite right. And yes, of course. And then 107, that famous ayah that says that, okay, for you, for your religion, and for me, my religion. But nobody talks about the context that is given in the Sirah as to
Yes,
in what context it was said. And it is not a tolerant verse. In fact, it is the most intolerant verse. And
that's
actually, when the Quraysh offered them that, okay, let's respect each other, then he said, no, that is the context.
exactly. And I have to note, I believe it's Surah 109 that you're referring to, Al Kafirun.
Yeah,
But
yeah, I'll copy. 11109. Sorry. Yeah.
and it's worth noting also that Muhammad says, I have been commanded to fight against people until they confess that there's no God but Allah, and I'm his messenger. And so, whatever statement, whatever the meaning may be of 109, that you have your religion and I have mine, it does not mean that the Muslims are not going to fight against those who are not Muslim and try to forcibly incorporate them within the realm of Islam.
Okay. So one more question from me before I ask Vibhuti Jha ji to ask his questions. And that is that the topic today is a solution for Islamic Jihad. And you have your website, jihadwatch.org, running for such a long time and giving all the details of all the happenings that are going on. Uh, how do we find a solution? Does your book help in that direction? Or is there something more that we need to do? Are there any instances where defeating the narrative of Islam has provided a solution in history? Or is it only the Spanish and the Chinese lessons?
Well, I can't. I'm not going to endorse the what the Chinese government is doing now. If you're going to be just as repressive and violent as the jihadis, then it's not what's the point of fighting against them? But there is a deal that can be done. In the first place, I have to say, unfortunately, there's no solution, but there is managing the problem. A solution would involve everyone leaving Islam, which is not likely to happen. As long as there are people who believe in the Quran and in Muhammad, there will be jihad, because the Quran and Muhammad teach jihad. And so what needs to be done, however, you're absolutely right, is raise awareness in the first place that the Quran and Muhammad teach jihad. I wrote the history of jihad in order to try to raise awareness of the fact that for 1400 years there's been jihad. without any pause, without any let up, all over the world. And so people think that it's a modern problem, or people think that there were periods of tolerance and peace. This is false. I wrote The Truth About Muhammad so people would understand that the Islamic texts about Muhammad teach violence, and that Muslims who imitate Muhammad are going to be violent. And now I have the critical Quran to teach people that the Quran itself teaches violence and warfare against unbelievers. Now, understanding these three things, the scripture, the tradition, and the history of Islam, will do a great deal to help people to realize what we're dealing with. Because the biggest problem we have right now is not even the jihad. It is our political leaders who deny that there is any jihad or any problem at all. And as a result of their denial, they are allowing the jihadis to advance in all manner of ways. And this is not just the violent jihadis, but the stealth jihadis as well. Those who are advancing the same goal to impose Islamic law, Sharia, upon non-Muslim political entities by peaceful, non-violent means. And this happens all over the world. One of the main ways this happens, as a matter of fact, is by the stigmatization and the demonization of those who speak about this honestly, so that they can say, oh, the three of us here, we're not worth listening to because we're racists and bigots and Islamophobes. And this kind of name-calling, as vapid and empty as it is extremely effective in intimidating people. In both, people are afraid to speak out because they're afraid to be defamed in the same way, and people are afraid to listen to us because they are afraid that we are engaging in something that is hateful or forbidden or evil in some way. And so the first thing that we need to work on is to break through that and to raise awareness of it. The only way to do that is to keep telling the truth. It's really a very simple process, because these things are true every day. The reality is there every day. Especially in India today, with so much jihad activity, there's so much news that proves that there is a problem with Islam. And then I see, of course, there's so much lying about it, and even the latest riots, people are saying that the Hindus were the perpetrators and so on. All we can do is keep telling the truth and keep bringing evidence, and more people will wake up to the reality. As far as managing the problem also, one of the foremost things we have to do is make sure that there is one law for everyone in the country, one single system of laws, and that there are no special privileges or special groups that obey different laws. And this is something, of course, it's an extreme controversy right now in India. It shouldn't be, because it's the basis of any free society, that there are no privileged groups, that everyone is subject to the same laws and the same accountability. Of course, that's theoretically the case in the United States, but not really the case. And this is one of the problems, that it's hard to call upon countries to adopt a system that isn't even working where it's supposedly adopted. But that's because of the deep and endemic corruption that prevails in the political class today worldwide.
Quite right. Vibhuti Ji?
Yes, it is fascinating to hear you, Robert, and Sanjay ji, illuminating all of us and educating all of us. So we are talking about solution. And there has to be, if there is a problem, there has to be a solution. So I would say, if all the Muslims don't leave Islam, the problem is not going to happen. But there is a thing called Albert Einstein said, any intelligent fool can complicate a simple problem. We have to move in the other, it takes courage to move in the other direction. So I'll take the cue from here is, let's break down the problem into social, technology, driven by technology, economics, and politics. And if we prioritize the problem of each one of these areas, then we can begin to probably attend to the solution. So like, for example, non-believer, kill, convert to Islam, but which Islam? Shia, Sunni, Ahmadiyya, Aga Khani, which one is the preferred one? And what is the guarantee that Shia and Ahmadiyas will not kill each other, or Sunnis will not kill each other? So let's ask them this question. So if I want to convert to Islam, which part of Islam do I convert to? Let them give us the answer. The other element also is very important to breaking down the problem. There's halal economics of halal. How do we address to that? Nowadays, you would notice that even forget the goat meat or beef, even vegetables, rice, pulses, everything has to be marked as halal. Where did that come from? How did open societies like ours surrendered or gave in to that insidious penetration of our economic system? So these are issues that if we break it into social, technology, economics, and politics, we may begin to find solutions in each one of these areas. And because all of them are connected, we may begin to address problems with everywhere. So first of all, what do you think, Robert? My question to you is, how do we use technology to propagate, as you have done the book, to disseminate the message, create awareness, and the plan to act?
Well, we're doing it right now, aren't we? We're discussing these issues. You're not going to find discussion of these issues in many other fora. And so many people will hear about these things because we're discussing them. And then many others will take up this discussion. This is the use of technology to spread the truth. But your points are very well taken and very important. And one of them about halal, I wanted to comment on. This is exactly what I'm referring to when I say we need to enforce one law for all. It's an extraordinary situation that so many things are labeled halal that have nothing to do with halal, as you noted. Vegetables, even chocolate is labeled halal. These things have nothing to do with Islamic food laws whatsoever. They have to do with the food companies paying a kickback to Islamic groups that certify for halal so that they don't get protested as Islamophobic. Meanwhile, in the United States, I can give you an example. Years ago, there was a controversy over the discovery that meat was being sold in the United States that was halal, that was not labeled as such. And Pamela Geller and I actually traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with officials of the Food and Drug Administration in Washington. And we asked them to begin to label food halal so that people would know if they didn't want to buy it. Because obviously if there's meat out there that's halal and people don't want to support the halal industry, they don't know what's halal and what isn't. And they put us on, we had a long meeting and they assured us they would study the issue. And then we never heard from anyone again. And they have been unresponsive to all our requests for years about it. And the halal meat is still not labeled halal. Now, if there were one standard for all citizens and for all groups, this kind of thing would not happen. If the meat were labeled halal, then those who wanted the halal meat would be able to have it, and those who didn't want the halal meat would be able to avoid it. But there is not one standard for all groups. There is a privileged status for the Islamic groups that is not recognized in law and is not even officially acknowledged by the officials who are enforcing it, but it's there. And so once we bring it out in the open, perhaps we might be able at some point to get sympathetic officials who will change this. But there are 1,000 examples of this kind all over, where Muslims are granted special privileges in a subtle and tacit way that is not publicly acknowledged, and most people aren't even aware that it exists, in order to prevent unrest and the protests and the strife that would come from Muslims claiming they're being discriminated against. And actually, that claim of discrimination is another arena in which Islamic groups around the world have made tremendous gains and been able to establish special privileges. We have to remember that Islamic law grants a status to Muslims above the status of non-Muslims. And so there are always pushes for special privileges and special accommodation that first we have to realize as such. But this is a very large problem, and it's an comprehensive, multifaceted international problem with most of the governing officials in most countries not aware of it or ready to accommodate the Islamic groups. So even just beginning to call attention to that is at least one step forward.
As a follow-up, I just wanted to check with you one more thing. You alluded to that already, that in the law, they are accorded a somewhat higher accommodation than the non-Muslims. But why is it that the West and the various democracies, the leadership is bending backwards to accommodate Islam? Even RSS chief in India talks about same DNA theory, but the same DNA thing applies to the entire humanity, all life forms. So why is it so that nations and countries are bending backwards to accommodate a very belligerent belief system where radicalization is so rampant in their beliefs? There's no argument, there's no discussion. The freedom of speech dies because you can't even question, make an inquiry. Freedom of speech is not about you and I talking. It's about making an inquiry, which is at the root of all inventions, discoveries, innovations, or improvements in life. What is it that drives the entire West democracies bending backwards to accommodate such a belligerent belief system?
In the United States today, there is, and of course all around the world to varying degrees, but in the US right now, there is tremendous strife and trauma about racism. Now, racism is officially against the law. It is forbidden to discriminate on the basis of race or religion or gender, etc. However, there is the claim from the left that America is riddled with systemic racism, that the very ways in which various things operate is inherently racist and gives advantage to white people. This is nonsense, but nonetheless, on the basis of this claim, the further claim is advanced that various victimized groups that have suffered because of this supposed systemic racism, need special accommodation and special consideration in order to achieve equity with the whites. Consequently, various groups are given special privileges and accommodations. The Islamic groups in the United States have very skillfully played on this controversy and America's national trauma about racism going back in its history. They have portrayed Islam as a racial group, even though Islam is not a race and Muslims are of all races. And as a racial group, they have been able to claim that they're discriminated against and harassed in the United States in a unique way, which is not true. The FBI publishes hate crime statistics every year, and Jews are victimized far more often than any other group, and Muslims are always, year after year, way down on the list. No hate crime is justified, but just claim that Muslims are suffering some immense discrimination in the United States is politically motivated propaganda and not fact. But on that basis, they're able to lay hold of all manner of special accommodation. And this includes even in regard to counterterror efforts. For example, New York City for years operated a very effective program that stopped several jihad plots that involved surveillance in Muslim communities. Now, why didn't they conduct surveillance in Hindu communities? Why didn't they conduct surveillance in Jewish communities? Because there was no terrorism coming out of those communities. There was terrorism in the Muslim communities, and that's why the surveillance was there. But the Muslims were able to claim that they were victims of racism and Islamophobia, and they got the program ended. And this kind of thing has happened all over the country. And so why do officials seem to accommodate this problem and not deal with it? Because they're terribly afraid of being called racist and terribly afraid of being called Islamophobic. And that indeed would be the end of their careers. And so you look at, for example, the rape gangs in England, in England, there were thousands of British girls, thousands, who were victimized by gangs of rapists from Pakistan, Pakistani Muslims who emigrated to England, and they began to rape non-Muslim girls on a massive scale, on an industrial scale, thousands of girls. And they did it on, some of them would quote the Quran and explain to the girls that they were doing it because the Quran allows infidel women to be used in this way. British authorities did nothing. They were afraid of being called racist and Islamophobic. Tommy Robinson called attention to it, and he was excoriated by the leftist groups, Hope Not Hate, and so on, as being racist and Islamophobic. He's still persecuted by the British government for calling attention to this. They wanted to let it all happen for the sake of their fantasies about a diverse, multicultural society. And this is why the jihad has advanced so far into the West, because officials are more afraid of being called racist than they are of actually confronting the Muslim communities.
Right. And you talked about racism. Now, I have this coming from the what is called the backward Muslim groups with whom I interact a lot. And according to them, they quote this verse, which was actually recited by Abu Bakr at the time of succession, when Prophet lay dying, and a great clash ensued in which the Ansars of the Medina, they claimed an equal share. At that time, this verse was cited by Abu Bakr that okay, that when he was asked to lead the prayer, at that time Muhammad said, Abu Bakr telling the Ansars, that leaders can only be from Quraysh, al-immatu min Quraysh. So that leaders can only be from Quraysh. So that is the biggest contribution to racism and rank racism, not just Arab. We have what is this called? This doctrine of kufu, which at least in the Indian Islam, the largest branch, that is the Hanafi Islam, this is the called the doctrine of kufu. Kufu means equality, but actually it is a doctrine of inequality. And the doctrine of inequality lays down very strict rules that says that okay, only certain people can marry, intermarry, and Arabs are the superior class. And till today in India, we have the certain classes, the Sayyids, the Sheikhs, the Pathans, the Mughals, as they call them Ashraf. That is Sharif, that is the Sharif means what? Noble. So these are the noble classes, and it's laid down as a doctrine, whereas everybody excoriates the Hindus, saying that okay, you have so much of discrimination, this and that. But that wherever it exists is only behavioral. There is no scripture within the Hindu pantheon that supports it. And here is the scriptural reference, the scriptural authority within Islam that supports racism totally and completely. And yet, anybody who calls it out is called a racist himself.
You're quite right. This is very important. Islam is a vehicle for Arab supremacism, and people
Yes.
don't realize this. But it's really as plain as anything is, as plain as the sun in the sky, that Islam is a vehicle for Arab supremacism. For example, think about the fact that there are Sayyids in India and Pakistan. These are people who claim to be descendants of Muhammad. In Iran, the mullahs who run the country, the ones who were descended from Muhammad, wear black turbans, and the other ones wear white turbans. And the black turban is a sign that you're descended from Muhammad. Now, how likely is it that there are a large number of people in Central Asia who are descended from this Arab from Arabia, who never left Arabia in his lifetime, if he existed at all, but that's another question. And
Yes. That's a question that is being discussed a lot these days. Yes.
indeed, and he has relatives all over places he was never even close to. Of course, it's obvious that many people have claimed to be descended from Muhammad for various political reasons, to gain advantage in the Muslim societies in which they live. Even the Caliph of the Islamic State, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, claimed to be a member of the Quraysh tribe for the reason you mentioned, that Abu Bakr said the leader has to be a Qurayshi. So here's this Iraqi who's never set foot in Arabia. Now, of course, I understand people travel and there's a lot of movement of peoples throughout history. So it's not absolutely impossible that al-Baghdadi was really a Qurayshi, but it's much more likely that he made the claim in order to be able to lay hold of the caliphate, because that's a prerequisite for being the caliph. And even more than that, for example, a few years back, I saw a meeting of the foreign ministers of the countries of Southeast Asia. And there they were all in a row. And I looked at their names. And the gentleman from Vietnam had a Vietnamese name. And the gentleman from Thailand had a Thai name. And the gentleman from China had a Chinese name, and so on. And then the gentleman from Indonesia had an Arab name. And he probably has never thought about the fact that his name, his culture, they're not indigenous to Indonesia any more than they are to Malaysia or to India or to Pakistan or Afghanistan. But it's an import from the Arabian Peninsula or a little farther north. And why is it incumbent upon converts to change their name to an Arab name? Why did the famous boxer Cassius Clay become Muhammad Ali when he became a Muslim? Well, he was not an Arab, but Islam is a vehicle for Arab supremacism, and it teaches that the Arabs are superior. There is still slavery in Islam because Islam teaches that the non-Arab Muslims are lesser. And in North Africa, they're still enslaved, many of them. This is something that is not discussed and is not generally known. But there is a very strong preference for Arabs and Arabia, Arabness in Islam. And it is probably a more racist and stratified system than any other that exists in the world today.
Okay, before we move to the audience questions, here's my last question to Robert. We find that there is a very big movement of apostates and people who are turning away from Islam and becoming atheist, a lot of them embracing other religions as well. In India, we see this phenomenon, of course, very small in number at this point, but people become atheists, people become Hindus, and in the West, a lot of people become Christians. But the kind of discussions they're having, I find that it is creating quite a ferment. And it is exposing Islam in a very big way. Do you think that this approach has a future?
Yes, absolutely. This is very important. Of course, there are varieties of ex-Muslims. Some courageous ex-Muslims, such as Ibn Warraq, Noni Darwish, Wafa Sultan, have done very important work and continue to do so. Other ex-Muslims retain so much of their Islamic attitudes that they maintain a hostility toward other non-Muslim groups, and even to critics of Islam who have never been Muslims. Like I include in this group Ali Rizvi, Abdullah Samir, people like that. They're not really any use. They're more useful to the jihadis than they are to non-Muslims. But there is a growing awareness among ex-Muslims. I mean, there is a growing movement of ex-Muslims, many of whom are doing excellent work to challenge and criticize the beliefs and assumptions of Muslims. And this is very important because, for example, the non-Muslim governments of the world, many of them are placing great hope on de-radicalization programs. And these are based on the idea that Islam is a religion of peace. And they will teach
Yes.
jihadis. You know, it's ridiculous. They'll teach the jihadis the true peaceful Quran, and then everything will be okay. And of course, the jihadis laugh at this because they know what's in the Quran and they know it's not peaceful. And they know this whole thing is a charade. The governments of the world do not have the courage to actually try to disabuse the jihadis of their Islamic beliefs altogether. But that is the real effective way to make a jihadi not a jihadi. Even Musa Sarantonio the other day, an Australian non-Muslim who became a Muslim, became an ISIS leader. And he left Islam now. He realizes, he said, the Quran is plagiarized. What if our governments were telling jihadis that they're trying to de-radicalize, that the Quran is plagiarized, that the Quran is full of non-Arabic words, that the Quran it doesn't make any sense in many places, that the Quran is all these other things that are true about it, then that would stop the jihadis. And so, yes, the ex-Muslim movement is very important insofar as the ex-Muslims are not just backhanded apologists for Islam.
If I may push in if I might push in my one last question for you, Robert, here it would be driven by one particular fact, that our freedom of speech and freedom of inquiry is being curtailed. Islamophobia bill is one such example. We now know their true intent. They want to shut us up. You can't question anything. It will be termed as propaganda and incitement. And then we need to go through an education process to rehabilitate us, How do we contest that in our political system, which is very important? Because if we can't demand reciprocity, then nothing is going to happen. We are way too humble. One of the things is that they are radicalized already. We are pumping money into de-radicalization and they laugh at us. You rightly said so. So the question here again is, if we are able to break down the entire process into social, economic, politics, and driven by technology, where do we need to make our first push? If I may say, prioritizing, where do we need to do that? They're clearly using our system against us.
Oh, yeah. And so we need to press their own contradictions, because in the first place, it's not a fair fight. And they are trying to shut us up. And so we can be as reasonable as the day is long and be as fact-based and have all the information on our side. It's not going to make any difference because they are not playing on a rational playing field. However, if we press their contradictions, then their hypocrisy starts to become clear. And then their whole house of cards is vulnerable. For example, they claim to be feminists and that they care for women's rights, and yet one of the most oppressive systems for women in the world, if not the most oppressive, is Islam. And so I have told young people on college campuses, have a Women's Rights Day and talk about the plight of women oppressed in Islam and women who've been brutalized, beaten up, or killed for not wanting to wear hijab and so on. And the more we do that and show up their hypocrisy, the less they'll be able to claim a moral authority in shutting us up as Islamophobes and so on.
Okay, so I think time to move to the audience questions. There are quite a few. And let's move to the questions. Before that, I request everybody to please like this video, share it around as much as you can, and also to go to the description and subscribe to our Vimarsh channel, subscribe to us as well, and also support us and follow us. The links are all in the description. RP, Bharat needs an anti-jihad special operations force with 21st century equipment who can work day and night regardless of which political party is at the center.
Yeah. It does.
That's the Spanish solution, I guess.
Yes, you're quite right. Every country needs this, but this is what was prevented after 9/11. When George W. Bush on September 17th, 2001, went into the mosque in Washington, D.C. and said Islam is peace, and undercut any connection between Islam and what had happened. This made it much more difficult, not just for the US, but for the governments of the world to deal with this problem realistically. And that's only gotten worse in the intervening 2 decades.
Okay. Next question will be asked by Vibhuti Ji.
Sonak Santra. Thank you, Sonak. Isn't compulsion to conform a facet of all Abrahamic faiths, including Christianity? Just like Islam, even Christianity believes in conversion, as we see in India. Can we not call that a jihad of sorts?
Well, you can call it whatever you want, I suppose, but there's a big difference. The difference is this. Let's say that a missionary comes to my door and says, convert. Well, and I say no. And then the missionary leaves. In Islam, if an Islamic dawah missionary comes to my door and says convert, and I say no, then he can kill me. Now, I am not talking about the controversies over forced conversion or bribery for conversion and so on in India. I repudiate all that. I have no support for any of that. But it's to compare it to Islam, I think, is out of focus because there is a big difference. Muhammad says, when you meet the unbelievers, this is a hadith, first, invite them to accept Islam. And so that's the same as the Christian missionaries. Second, if they refuse, invite them to pay the jizya, the tax that is specified in the Quran, chapter 9, verse 29, that the infidels have to pay into the Islamic treasury to reinforce the hegemony of Islam. And if they refuse to do that, then seek Allah's help and fight them. Those two, the second and the third parts of that, there's no correspondence to that in Christianity. So I don't see that you have the same kind of violence or the same kind of religious justification for the violence.
At least to the Christians, you can say, just say no.
Yes.
You can even tell them scram.
Scram. Sure.
Whereas in the Hidayah and as well as in the Fatawa Alamgiri, which the Jaipur Dialogues is translated into Hindi now,
Excellent.
it is very clear, says that, okay, that definition of jihad is the act of inviting the infidels to Islam and fighting them if they refuse.
There it
This
is.
is both in the Hidayah as well as in the Fatawa Alamgiri, identical. Okay, next question. VJ Reddy. Why does the non-Islamic West double down defending Islam despite so much terrorism, anti-Jewish and Christian, anti-women, and anti-gay ideology?
This is the result of the power of the left that has allied with the jihadis, and they have spread this propaganda about terrorism in the first place has nothing to do with Islam. Even Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and so many others have said this. Terrorism has nothing to do with Islam, and consequently, to talk about Islam in connection with terrorism is wrong, racist, and Islamophobic. And meanwhile, Muslims are the victims of racism, and so we need to give them special accommodation and special aid. And so this is the prevailing situation in the West, and it's because of an extremely skillful propaganda campaign.
Right. Next question by Vibhuti Ji.
Okay, so we'll go alternate now. Good.
Yeah,
Next.
we'll go alternate now.
Jahangir Gotla. Thank you, Jahangir. Was wondering if Robert saw Kashmir Files and what impact this film may have made in the West. Also, I believe minority nonsense needs to go in India.
Where I live, there has not been a showing, and so I have not yet had an opportunity to see it. If it comes to this area, I will certainly see it. I've heard a great deal about it and published information about it on Jihad Watch. And a friend who has seen it has told me he's going to write a review, which I will publish at Jihad Watch as soon as he gets it to me. In the meantime, it's very important, everything that I know about it. Of course, I know about what happened in Kashmir and what it depicts. And this is something that most Americans have no idea about whatsoever. And this film needs very wide distribution, the widest possible distribution, in order to raise awareness about that. And like we've been saying, the awareness is all. It's the first step toward bringing about real change. And insofar as I have any kind of forum, I will do all I can to continue to raise awareness about this film.
Thank you.
Okay, next one. Gururaj Deshpande, thank you. Thank you for your support. Oneness. Robert, the West was seemingly giving Islamic fanaticism a tough fight post 9/11. Somewhere it got caught up with the colonial guilt for it to woo the Muslim community, so much that Muslims find the West to be a safe haven. What's with the West?
Ah, I wish I knew. The West is committing slow suicide. Maybe not so slow anymore, but I have to say, I don't really think that the West ever gave Islamic fanaticism a tough fight. What happened after 9/11 was that George W. Bush said that Islam had nothing to do with what happened. 6 days after, just as I said a few minutes ago. And that immediately hamstrung the US government's ability to deal with this problem realistically. Then the US invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. 15 of the 19 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia. And there were numerous indications that were covered up for years and only have come out in the last few years that the high-level authorities in the Saudi government were involved in this. And the Islamic Republic of Iran, this is not well known, but it's well documented. The Islamic Republic of Iran helped the hijackers get into Afghanistan for training and get out of Afghanistan and back into the United States without being detected. And so the Islamic Republic of Iran and Saudi Arabia were the two states that were most involved with the attacks, and yet the United States invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. So the problem was wrongly dealt with from the beginning. And there was never any confrontation. There still has not been any confrontation by the US of the motivating ideology behind the conflict. During World War II, the US was very clear about what was Nazism and why we were fighting it, and what was the state Shinto ideology in Japan and why we were fighting it. But there's been no clarity at all whatsoever from the US government about what jihad is and why they hit us on 9/11 and what we must do. They've never even admitted that this thing exists.
Okay, next one.
Rahul Bhatia. Why US has no conversation to ban jihad ideology and separate it from Islam? Woke start in US and spread to other places. US adopts something, it has impact on the entire world. But you allowed Times Square, and I think he's referring to the Ramadan offerings in Times Square.
Yes. Well, that was inevitable, because once you have all the officials in the United States, all of them, saying Islam is benign, Islam is peace, Islam is therefore entirely welcome in the United States without any reservations of any kind, then it was only inevitable that we would see the scenes in Times Square that we saw Saturday, and we're going to see much more of it, and the blocking of traffic and everything else that we've seen in other countries for the prayers. Now, why has the US had no conversation about separating the jihad ideology from Islam? Because of everything I've been saying, that Islam has nothing to do with the jihad, it's nothing to do with terrorism. This is what most American officials assume, because they've been so thoroughly propagandized for the last 20 years. And so we have Hillary Clinton saying a few years back, Islam is peaceful and tolerant, and Muslims have nothing whatsoever to do with terrorism, which is true of some Muslims, but not true of others. But you can't say that some Muslims have something to do with terrorism and that it's based on their Islamic beliefs. You can't say that in America. If you do, you'll be excoriated as a racist and an Islamophobe. And politicians, above all, don't want to have that kind of name attached to them. They know it'll be the end of their careers.
All right. Okay. Next question. Before that, I just have to remind people to go down to our description where our subscription plans are listed. Okay. The next question. Oneness again.
No, no.
Robert, do you think that the system of US lobbying is the main reason for the socio-political rise of Islam? Are the US lawmakers not shooting its citizens in the head?
Yes.
Greed not called out. Why?
There's pandemic corruption in the U.S. today. The politicians are the ones who are the greedy ones who are getting paid by these lobbies in various indirect ways. You know, you hear sometimes about various officials in the U.S. government getting $5 million. Like there's a controversy right now. Joe Biden is supposed to have gotten millions of dollars for his book that nobody read. He sold fewer books than anyone, and yet he got millions of dollars for his book. Well, obviously somebody was paying him for influence, and it was disguised. It was laundered as a book. And in the same way, many other politicians get $500,000 to speak somewhere, something like that. And really, it's money laundering for buying their allegiance to whatever cause. And the Islamic groups have done this very skillfully. They have unlimited money because of the oil connections. And so they have bought large portions of Washington and so many lawmakers of both parties. This is why they go around saying Islam is peace.
Okay, so Vibhuti Ji can charge after he becomes a lawmaker because he's contesting an election for the New York State Assembly.
Yeah. Questions, freedom of speech.
Yeah, I know Jason. He does excellent work. And so that would be a wonderful discussion you would have with him.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll take your help in getting him on.
Sure, I can get you his address.
Good.
Yes.
Yes.
Poonam Abi. Thank you, Poonamji. How does Mr. Spencer address the issue of rapidly growing animosity and public call against Hindus in America and India, as evidenced by the California cases and the dismantling Hindutva type events?
This is a function of the power of the Islamic groups in the United States. They have got millions of dollars from Arabia and from Qatar, and they use it for this kind of thing. You have the universities in the United States, Harvard, Georgetown, others, some of the most prestigious universities in the country, getting millions of dollars from Qatar and millions of dollars from Prince Al-Walid bin Talal in Saudi Arabia. The Georgetown University has the Prince Al-Walid bin Talal Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, which is just dawah, Islamic proselytizing, in a university format. And the same money has paid for this hostility against Hindus in American academia. Because, of course, you have Muslim Brotherhood groups that are financing America's universities.
Right.
Next question.
Disha Parekh. What can be done to release temples from the government control that would boost financial strength of Hindus? I think this is not the topic of discussion today, and we'll deal with it some other time. Sanatan Sarawa, perplexed by the undeterred support that Muslim women provide, even though the book considers Muslim women to be material objects with lesser capability, how do we educate such women and bring them out of their troubles?
Many people are perplexed by this all over the world. And they think, why don't the Muslim women protest? But you have to imagine, if you're a Muslim woman, this is the context in which you live. The unbelievers are apes and pigs. They're animals. They have no They have no wisdom. They don't have anything to tell us. And so their women are free and the Muslim women are slaves. That's the natural order of things. The women shouldn't be free. And many women would be Muslim women would be the first to tell you this. And a Muslim woman like Ilhan Omar or Linda Sarsour wearing the hijab, they're doing it for to gain political status in the game of identity politics in the United States. But at the same time, they say it's their right and it's their privilege for modesty and so on. And this is what they're told. This is what they grew up hearing. And the only other voices are voices they don't trust or like because they're not Muslims. So it's very easy for Muslim women to fall into this way of thinking because it's what they're taught from the beginning. And so the first thing you have to do is challenge here again, just like with the jihadis, challenge the truth of the belief system, not on the basis of some kind of universal understanding of women's rights, because they don't believe in that, but on the basis that Muhammad's not really a prophet. He may not even have existed. The Quran is this hodgepodge of nonsense. It's not really a holy book. And then you can deal with women's rights.
I may just add here, there were several Muslim women who have embraced Hinduism and other faiths, and they are on Twitter and social media evoking and inspiring us to act.
Excellent.
And I would say that to us, a call is that let's embrace them. I mean, let's encourage them. And instead
Yes,
of
I have interviewed quite a
yes,
few of them.
we have both done this. Yes, we have both done it. Yeah, that's right. Next question. Run a day, Robert G., who circumcised the Islamic prophet Muhammad, and will Muslims get their foreskin back on the judgment day? Oh God, I mean, I don't know if you want to address that question.
I don't know. I don't know what to say about this. There may be a hadith about that. I don't remember, tell you the truth, offhand. That's never been an object of great concern for me, I must admit. In any case, this is just something that is done. Muslims do because this is commanded. It's just like everything else. And there is no idea in Islam of something being done because it's right, because it conforms to the natural order of things or something like that. Islam is entirely religion of command. Everything Muslims do, they do because Allah said to do it. Why? Don't ask. We don't know, but
oh yes, there is this the Quranic ayah 16.101 that says that if you ask questions, you become a kafir.
Yeah, that's right. There's 5101 that says the same thing. That
Sorry?
Chapter 5101 says that exactly that. O you who believe, do not ask about things which, if they were made known to you, would trouble you. But if you ask about them while the Quran is being revealed, which of course nobody can do that now, they will be made known to you. Allah forgives this, for Allah is forgiving, merciful. But people before you asked and then became unbelievers. So the whole idea of critical inquiry is discouraged, absolutely.
Yes, that the 16.101 is almost identical. So both are 101. Remember, 1, not 1. Okay? Next. Ajay, why did it take the West to recognize Islamic Jihad only after 9/11 and not learn from what India faced in the last 1400 plus years, as India was calling it from rooftops for years? I should say centuries.
Centuries,
yes.
right.
But the West doesn't value history. Nobody knows history in the West. I wrote the history of jihad, and it includes the jihad against India. This was the first narrative history of jihad in the West published in the West, to include the story of the jihad against India. Most Americans have no idea any of that happened. And most the popular histories of jihad that have been published even since 9/11 did not include the jihad against India. Mine was the first to do so. So why did the West discover jihad only after 9/11? The West has no historical memory. You ask the average person on the street in New York or Paris or London anything about jihad, they won't know, even now. And if they do know, it'll be an interior spiritual struggle for the betterment of the soul.
Saurav Kulkarni, Robert Spencer, is Republican Party aware of slash against the jihadis? And Robert, if you feel threatened by jihadis, chant Hanuman Chalisa.
Thank you. Uh, is the Republican Party aware of and against the jihadis? There are some Republicans who are, but generally the Republican Party is almost as useless as the Democrat Party. The Republicans generally favor the same idea that Islam is peace. After all, George W. Bush was a Republican, and he's the first one who said this on a grand scale: Islam is peace. And it became the essentially the policy of the Republican Party. Back in 2007, which is now 15 years ago, I debated Dinesh D'Souza in Washington at CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Conference. Now, the Conservative Political Action Conference is Republicans, but Dinesh D'Souza represented the mainstream view among them that Islam is peace. I was trying to argue the opposite. I believe there are portions of that debate that are still available on YouTube. But in any case, that's still the dominant view of the Republican Party. I was the outlier. As a matter of fact, they actually had the debate. The CPAC organizers, I found out later, had the debate in order to discredit the point of view that I represented, because they wanted to make sure that all the Republicans thought that Islam was peace. It didn't quite work so well for Dinesh, but in any case, that's just me saying you can judge for yourself. And the biggest problem that we have is that there's no significant political group that speaks about this problem realistically.
Next. Ajay, with the perpetual assertions by Islam across the globe over the centuries, why is the West still oblivious to the fact that it is the greatest danger to humanity and world order, and why does West still give shoulder to Islamophobia?
It's all the left. It's all because of the left and the left's hegemony. And the left, like Islam, they're both authoritarian. They both want to establish an authoritarian polity, and consequently they see each other as allies, and they have done this to the United States and the whole world, and made people think that jihad is not the problem, Islamophobia is the problem.
Next.
Tanmay Pandey, can we not force our government to describe all forms of jihad and their consequences in long run for Hindus and nations? The local leaders should take charge to make everywhere aware of it.
Sure. One thing we must do in all countries is not support candidates at any level who do not demonstrate an awareness of this issue. But most people aren't even interested in doing that because they themselves don't have an awareness of this issue.
Next. Sudarshan, please invite Dr. Shatavadhani Ganesh from Bangalore. Sandeep Balakrishna knows him very well. The talk of the tribe of Shivaram and Krishna in shaping the Indic values and philosophical framework will be very useful for Hindus all across the country. Thank you, Sudarshan. I have approached him. Let's see. Next.
Sudarshan again. Can I translate Robert Spencer's The Lady's Guide to Quran into Kannada, please?
I don't know this book, The Lady's Guide to Quran. That's a very interesting title. I've written such a book. Maybe I'll have to.
Maybe I will add on. Sanjay ji has not said anything, but I will say that to be translating into Hindu in Hindi language, I think Jaipur Dialogue will collaborate with you to do that.
That would be wonderful. I'd be very honored to.
Yes, Hindi we can do any
Yes.
day.
Great.
It's not a problem.
Well, we can discuss that. The publisher of the book in the United States, Bombardier Books, they own the foreign rights, so we have to deal with them, and that's where it gets complex.
I know. Next. Pune Babi, the halal certification fees all over the world is their jizya.
Yep.
Yes, it is. I guess that's an observation. So we just go with it.
Yes. Hindu Communalist. Is there Kindle version of your book? Number 2, as the states incentivize being a Muslim through reservations, etc., what motivation do Muslims have to leave Islam?
I'm happy to say there is a Kindle edition of the book, The Critical Quran. I just saw it yesterday. It was just completed. It's beautiful. I'm very happy to say that it's even better than the print edition because of the way it's set up. But in any case, it is not yet available, but it will be available very soon. And as long as governments are incentivizing Islam, then what motivation do Muslims have to leave? Well, none, of course, and they are incentivizing it. And so they are the primary problem. What we need is a massive change in the governing classes. And maybe the next election will bring that. We'll see.
Well, just a correction. There's no reservation as such, but of course there are incentives.
Incentives, yes.
Next question. Shajar Safaya, same jihadi ideology cut my community into pieces in Kashmir. Obviously, Islam means peace, spelled Piece.
Quite right.
Intellectually confused. I love your name. How was Dawa movement impacted in US culture? How has Dawa movement impacted in US culture?
What here again, it's all because of the left, but Dawa is acceptable in American culture in a way that proselytizing for any other religion, including Christianity, is not. So I frequently see in American newspapers stories about Islam and about how Muslims understand this or that, how Muslim wisdom is useful to understand some issue or problem. You never see what Christianity thinks about this or that in American papers. And this is all, of course, bought and paid for and allowed by the leftists who run these papers.
Praveen Yara, how did the Christianity spread across the world through peace, wiping out Europe, North, South America, Australia, African civilization, killing crows? I think I'll pass this to take the next one. Next one, please. Chaser.
Is,
Not
crit- is critical Quran available in any Indian language? Not as yet. Not as
yet,
yet. But
not yet, but I hope it will be.
yeah.
In Yemen, most Muslims are fanatic. Why fear? Leaders have to take strong decisions, even end career, collateral damage for better future. I saw a video of Muslim doing namaz during daytime square. Will continue.
Well, it will continue, and there'll be more of it, as we said before. And if most Muslims are fanatical, it's because the Quran teaches this. It's interesting. People speak in the United States very often about radical Islam. And they say they're opposed to radical Islam, as if there is a benign Islam that is not radical. That okay, nobody's worried.
Well said.
But the problem is that if you read the Quran and it says kill them wherever you find them, and when you meet the unbelievers, strike the necks, and on and on and on, that's radical. So the radical Islam is actually mainstream. We can be glad that there are some Muslims who are not radical, but they are not following what the book dictates.
Right. Okay.
Due to
Your book,
Robert's Ratnadeep,
your book is pre-ordered for rupees 12,588 in India. Nobody's going to buy it.
I have no control over the pricing. I'm sorry. And anything that has to be imported nowadays, also, both ways, it's extraordinarily expensive, and all this has to do with the rapidly rising inflation in the United States and everything that comes with it. And so I apologize for that, but that is something that is completely outside of my purview. In the contract that I sign for every book, it says that the publisher sets the prices, and the publisher sets the prices based on various considerations with no input from the author.
Okay. So then for translation, we'll charge them a hefty sum.
Ratnadeep Ambilwade. Due to Robert, sir, I left my secular ideology and turned towards reading about my Hindu Dharma. Question. Why world leaders don't go to the root cause of Islamic terror, that is the sky book?
Because they're constantly told that the root cause of Islamic terror is not the sky book, but something else. They're always told, for example, that it's poverty. And what that means for the United States, is that the United States has to pay money to Afghanistan or Pakistan or various other jihadi entities, and that this will supposedly solve the problem. They're being lied to, in other words, and they believe it.
Sharwin Shelke, how do you counter this ideology? By secularism or by being extremist of your own? So he's given a binary solution.
Not by either one, but by being who we are, by being unapologetically who we are, by uniting despite our own differences because we face a common foe, by being realistic about that foe, by being consistent and courageous. These are the ways that we're going to overcome this. Obviously, secularism has no force to deal with this and is collapsing in all over the world, really. You can look at what's happening in Turkey, for example, also all over Europe, and certainly by an extremist ideology of your own. Well, then why bother? If it's just violence against violence and dog eat dog, then how are you any different from them?
I have one suggestion to make, and that is something like demanding reciprocity. If there are so many Islamic centers brought about in the West and other places to teach us about the beauty of Islam, it's time for us to demand opening similar centers in Islamic
move
countries.
to the questions, otherwise we'll spend another hour here.
Yeah, that's
Vibhuti
right.
Ji.
Thank you. Then I was just saying that.
There far too many questions.
Yes, okay. Robert, seems that US politicians were first bought over by the Chinese prices and subsequently by the Middle East oil money, and it makes the whole world think that that's in the land of values and freedom. Isn't that a scam?
Yes. Yes, it is. Look, I'm an American. I was brought up being very proud of being an American, the land of the free and the home of the brave. That's all gone. We are being ruled by a corrupt and traitorous political class that is intentionally imposing policies that are not in the best interests of Americans or of the world at large. And unless and until this class is swept out utterly, maybe in 22, maybe in 24, but maybe never, then the United States is finished as a beacon of freedom.
Okay, next question is rather simple. Poonam Abhi, are Muslims doing what Allah said or what Muhammad said that Allah is saying?
Well, the only authority that we have in Islam for what Allah is saying is Muhammad. And Muhammad himself, if you read my book, Did Muhammad Exist?, may be a concoction that is more fiction, more legend than historical reality. But yes, even in the standard version of Islam, it all comes from Muhammad. It all comes, he says what Allah said. We don't have any idea. Allah's not thundering from the clouds so that everybody can hear.
Next.
Saunak Santra. On a lighter note, Robert, don't you receive threats on a daily basis for your work? Do stay safe. Your work is too valuable.
Yes, that's a very light note. I have received many threats, and there have been 2 attempts to kill me, and it's not as if I'm going to live forever. I'm not really worried about this. I can tell you that some years ago, I got a threat from someone. I got an email, and the email said, "I know where you live, and I followed you home from the supermarket. And next time I see you, I'm going to kill you." And so I went out and I said this to a friend who responded, "Oh, that's ridiculous. When were you last in the supermarket?"
Some look-alike will die.
Not, but
hope not.
Nation first. Every human first learn about al-taqiyya. Those who are creating problems were converted 2-3 generations back. So if they don't want the same in future, conversions issue should be dealt nicely.
Yes, well, that's true. Taqiyya is, in the first place, a Shiite doctrine, but it's common to Sunnis as well because it's based on chapter 3, verse 28 of the Quran, which allows for deception of unbelievers. And that deception, I think we're seeing on a very grand scale nowadays. And people don't realize they're being deceived, especially Americans. Americans are extraordinarily naive and trusting as a people. And if you say that someone is deceiving, the Americans are likely to think that you're a bad person for not believing them. And this is something that I've encountered for decades now. That it reflects poorly on me because I say we can't trust these people. You're right. Conversion to Islam has consequences, and converts to Islam are often the most virulent jihadis because they, you grow up in a Muslim context, and in many cases, not always, but in many cases, you're not going to be waging jihad, and you don't see anybody around you doing it. And so you're just used to it being taught and being there in the Quran, but it's not a live thing. Whereas converts, they read the book for the first time and they see this is a primary duty they have. And so there's an extraordinarily high number of converts to Islam who get involved in jihad violence. And I track that at Jihad Watch regularly.
Yes, and of course, I guess a need for approval from the great Arabs. Prabhakar Saraswat, what was that question? We lost it. Okay, Rajiv Daya, poor US Republican should be okay. Who's asking this question?
More US Republicans should be shown Kashmir files to be aware of jihad. Thanks to Ohio Republican Neeraj Antani for honoring cash files. Yes, that's right.
Next, Vijay M. Shouldn't we be worried about Arab investment in India? Is this sudden change in attitude about Islam by MBN? MBS actually, not
Yeah,
MBN.
Yeah, I don't believe MBS. That's Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, the de facto ruler of Saudi Arabia. He says he's reforming Islam, and then 81 people he executed not long ago. He had executed. He didn't do it himself. And many of them were executed for Islam-related crimes, such as apostasy, blasphemy, and so on. And he even defended this, saying the death penalty is in the Quran. We can't change it. Well, there's plenty of things that are in the Quran, and if he thinks he can't change it, then there's not going to be any meaningful reform. And yes, you should be worried about Arab investment in India.
Okay. It isn't too much anyway.
Yeah. Jahangir Gotla, can we advocate kafirophobia?
The problem is this is not a fair fight. This is not an even playing field. And so, yes, we should try to, like I said before, call attention to their hypocrisy. But we are not going to get the same treatment because this is not really about equal rights for everyone or everything that the left says. This is about the advantages of their protected groups, and we're not one of them.
Nishikant Reddy, why don't the security agencies across West and India read the philosophies taught in madrasas that can be a threat to nation security? Well, I have been trying to teach them. Nobody listens. And Pakistanis have written a book. They call it a Quranic concept of war. And I found out from my military institutions that they don't teach it in India. Come on.
They should teach it. It's endorsed by Zia ul Haq. You can't higher authority than that. And so it's astonishing, really. But it's the same kind of denial that we were talking about. It's all over the world. Everyone thinks Islam doesn't have anything to do with terrorism, and they will not examine the data that shows otherwise.
Next question. Ajendra Chaurasia. A Maulana told jizya was taken 1.5%. What's the truth?
The truth is that jizya, it varies, but it's onerous. It's not 1.5%. I'll tell you why. Here's the proof. Zakat, the obligatory alms that the Muslims have to pay, is 2.5%. Now, human nature being what it is, people don't like to pay taxes. Not in America, not in India, nowhere. But taxes are an unavoidable part of life. Now, if the tax for the non-Muslims was lower than the tax for Muslims, there would be many Muslims converting to other religions. So they would pay the lower rate. Did we ever see that in 1400 years of Islamic history? We did not. And that is proof in itself that the jizya was never 1.5%. It was always more than 2.5%. Because what we did see were millions of infidels converting to Islam to pay the lower tax. To the extent that in various places at various times, as I show in the history of jihad, the conversions had to be forbidden because it was destroying the tax base. The non-Muslims had to be forbidden to convert to Islam so that they would keep paying the taxes.
Next. Priyank Bharadwaj, though 9/11 was committed by Islamic terrorists, majority of Muslims don't condemn the same. Why West is too much inclined towards concept of Islamophobia?
The left works all on victimhood. If you're a victim, then you get special privileges. So if you can claim that you are the victim of systematic discrimination and harassment, then you are in line to be one of the protected classes of the left. And so the Muslims played this game. They invented this concept of Islamophobia, and they put it over so that they become one of the victimhood groups. And now they have the special accommodations. It was very cleverly done.
Prabhakar Saraswat. Impose jizya tax on every US citizen so they can read and understand Holy Quran very quickly.
Don't give Joe Biden any ideas. I'm sure
Next.
he could give us more tax.
Okay, Mahesh Madhur. Thank you very much, Mahesh. Thank you for this wonderful support. Thank you.
Intellectually confused. Religion were created to control people.
Anyway, that's a remark. I think we can leave it
Yeah.
at that.
I leave it at that.
Okay, so I think that brings us to the end of this wonderful session, and we had almost 50 questions. And thank
Yeah.
you, Robert,
Thank
for
you.
taking them up so patiently and
Thank
so
you.
beautifully. So thank you, Robert. Thank you, Vibhuti Ji, and thank you, all viewers.
Thank you.
And
Thank
signing
you,
off from
Jeremy.
here. Good night from here, and good day to both of you.
Yes. Good night and good day to all of us. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.